Okay, everyone, it's time to try and predict this fight. Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley get it on this weekend, live on DAZN pay-per-view. And as ever, we're trying to leave no stone unturned on this channel as we try to predict the fight. We're going to be looking at the psychological preparation of the two men. How are their mental states coming into this heavyweight clash? Physically, what are the considerations? What weight will Joseph Parker come in at? And how will Fabio Wardley's previous injuries hold up against such a ferocious puncher? And finally, who can execute the right set of tactics to get the win and maybe the knockout over the other man? Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. Right before I jump in, guys, I hope you're all incredibly well, and I hope you're so well that you want to smash that like button. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new, and it's your last chance. The most important thing that you can do on this video is get your prediction in the comments section below. And as you all know, I've got a link in the description for the fight if you'd like to buy it on DAZN pay-per-view. It helps to support my channel, and I'd really, really appreciate it if you would do that. I genuinely think this is going to be a barn burner. I think it's going to be a really, really good fight. And I really, really do not believe that this fight is a foregone conclusion. We're going to start by assessing the mental states of both men coming into this fight. And a lot of times approaching a big clash, there's stuff to read into. You see a face-off, you see a quote in the media, something that triggers your mind. And with these two, between the two of them, there really doesn't appear to be any personal needle. I think they're both very pragmatic, very realistic guys, and very honest and straightforward too. I think they probably quite like each other, and I could imagine them being mates after this, and I think that was reflective in the face-off. There was certainly, to my mind, no particular mind games at play. I didn't think that either of them went in there with a game plan to get under the other's skin, and it was all very cordial. But there are a couple of mental considerations coming into this one, a couple of psychological preparations that will need to have been ironed out for both men as they approach this fight. For Fabio Wardley, it's the simple fact that he's not been at this level before, and when he fought Justice Hooney, he was in a world of trouble until he got himself out of there with that single shot. And there's got to be mental doubts coming into this fight. Joseph Parker is, on paper, by far the best opponent that he has faced so far in his career. Hooney and Parker are not the same fighter, and Parker overall has a better skill set than Hooney. But there's a few things Hooney does that I think are probably on a higher level than Parker. I know not everyone agrees with this, but I do think that Hooney's foot speed, his movement, and potentially his gas tank as well are some way ahead of Parker's. Now, Parker hits much harder than Hooney. Parker has a much, much better chin than Hooney and much more experience than Hooney. But there are certain attributes I could point to and say I do think Hooney might be a slight level above Parker in those areas, to be fair. Not to say Parker does those things badly, it's just I think that Hooney does those things very well. And lucky for him that he does, because he definitely has some quite serious deficiencies in certain areas. So that's consideration for Fabio Wardley. For Joseph Parker, I believe the main thing here is that this guy has not been fighting regularly. And, you know, for any fighter, well, for most fighters, not fighting regularly is a bit of an issue unless you're someone like Terence Crawford and you're super happy just fighting once a year. In fact, he seems to thrive just fighting once a year. But as a rule of thumb for fighters, that's not generally true. And it seems like Parker himself has been a bit frustrated that he's only been fighting once a year. He keeps saying that he wants to be active. Now, there's multiple reasons for wanting to be active. Of course, you want to earn money. Of course, you might just enjoy boxing and you want to achieve things while you've still got freshness about you. But also, there may be an understanding with Parker that he thinks he will be in better form if he's performing more regularly. I think he's basically said himself this inactivity doesn't do him any good. So there must be some slight doubts going into this fight from him that he might have a bit of ring rust when he gets in there. And that would be quite troubling because Wardley is a very, very dangerous man. You don't want to be getting in there and feeling the ring rust. You need to make sure you're very, very sharp and switched on from the word go. You could also argue there's extra pressure for Parker because clearly he's been waiting for that Usyk fight and he's got to the point where he's fed up of waiting. He can't do it any longer. And that must add a bit more pressure thinking, God, I waited all that time for Usyk. Now I'm going to go and fight Wardley, who could actually ruin all my plans to fight that guy in the first place. That's got to add another degree of pressure in your mind when you're approaching this fight if you're Joseph Parker. For Wardley, it does sort of feel like a free roll of the dice in that sense, and it might free him up in the ring a little bit. It might not too, and at the end of the day, Parker is an experienced guy who's been in there with a lot of big names. So I guess that one remains to be seen. I will also just say that the psychology of a big puncher as well in Fabio Wardley, I've heard some people suggesting that perhaps it makes him a bit complacent, that, you know, he just always sort of relies on that one shot and that's all he wants to do. There is an argument for that, but also I think it is what gives him his undying determination in the ring. He knows that no matter what happens to him, he always, always has a chance. And I think that is part of what makes him so dangerous throughout 12 rounds. Now, physical preparation is quite an interesting point of conversation, and we're immediately going to go to Joseph Parker, because out of the two of them, he is the one where there's probably more question marks around what weight he'll come into this fight at, how he strategically has approached this one in his training camp. A lot has been made of the presence of strength and conditioning coach George Lockhart, who he started working with in mid-2023. Since then, Joseph Parker hasn't lost a fight. I've seen comments suggesting that Parker, before he started working with Lockhart, wasn't in the best condition in terms of the strength and conditioning training he's been doing. Apparently, it's completely elevated his game. And weight-wise, it's going to be a fascinating one, as last fight he came into the ring at a career high 267 pounds. Normally he's around the sort of 240, so that's an extra sort of 20 pounds that Joseph Parker has piled onto his body there. And it told, people are saying you can't read much into that Bacole knockout, but look, despite the lack of conditioning from Bacole, I saw him get hit pretty clean on the top of his head, and he was completely scrambled. And this is Martin Bacole, who's got a very, very good chin. I've seen Martin Bacole get absolutely cracked for 12 rounds, and I do think this heavier Parker can punch quite a bit harder. But against Wardley, he's going to need to be quick. He's going to need to have a good gas tank. He's going to need to be very reactive and sharp. So I wonder if they might come in a little bit lighter for this one. I'm not sure what they're going to do. I'll be very, very interested to see how they decide to approach it in terms of the weight. I don't think that being heavier or lighter is necessarily a good or a bad thing. I just think it indicates a slightly different strategy, whichever way they decide to go with it. If he comes in heavier, of course, he's looking to promote power and really hurt Wardley when he does land. If he comes in lighter and looks for speed, he's obviously prioritizing movement, making sure he's safe, and then, capitalizing on Wardley's mistakes, just the way Huni did with those quicker hands. It'd be really interesting to see which one he chooses. As for Fabio Wardley, he nearly always comes in around 241, 243 these days, so he seems to have found his optimum weight. He obviously feels good at that weight, fresh at that weight, and his power seems to carry throughout the 12-round period. He has only done that distance once when he drew with Fraser Clark, but you could see right until the end, he was chucking as hard as he could. He looked absolutely out on his feet, but he was still punching pretty damn hard. I suppose the biggest concern physically for Wardley is that nose. That massive scar he's got on his nose. It always opens up in his fights now, and he bleeds everywhere. And look, it's got to be something that diminishes you a bit. You're losing a lot of blood. You're constantly having your vision blurred. It's just something that you don't really want or need in a fight. And you need every advantage fighting someone as good as Joseph Parker. And so that's going to certainly be a negative on this performance. I can't see any way in which that nose doesn't open up at some point, unless he somehow has a punch-perfect performance and finishes Parker. But the nature of the way Fabio Wardley fights tactically is that he is going to be in range to get hit regularly. That's just how he does his business. Which leads us beautifully into tactics. And look, I've done a full tactical breakdown video. You can go and check that out if you want the real detailed analysis. I'll put the link in the description for you or in the comments below or whatever. But the main thing here is Wardley has got very specific setups that he uses to get to his opponents. And the rest of the time, he is quite an unorthodox guy. He's quite difficult to read because he isn't your typical pro. There's a few different techniques he uses, but the main setups, I've shown you these right-hand setups he uses, nearly always they're the ways that he hurts the opponent, gets them going. And as I say, go and check out the tactical video if you want to see exactly what they are. But the question is whether or not Parker can do what he needs to do tactically to get out of these difficult situations and then go in there and do the damage to Wardley that he needs to do. Huni showed us the blueprint for how to negate everything that Fabio Wardley does, but Parker's not exactly like Justice Huni, although he does have some similar attributes. Huni's doing them in quite a different way. The basic overall tactical picture is this. I've heard a lot of people saying that they think Wardley needs to rush Parker, and it might get to that point if Parker is simply outboxing him. There might come a time in the fight where he needs to gamble and just go for it, but I don't think it's as straightforward as he's just got to jump on Parker from round one. I really don't. I think he'll be looking to land something big on Parker, because Parker is a hittable fighter, don't get me wrong. This is a guy you can definitely tag. And I think that Wardley will do what he always does. He'll sit in range, he'll find his moment, he'll use a pull counter, or he'll get his head off the line, or he'll pull the guard down and fire a big right hand, and he'll get Parker a little bit wobbly, and then he'll absolutely go for him, just like he always does. If he can't make one of those moments happen, then yes, he might have to go Super Saiyan, go crazy, and just start chucking shots from everywhere, try and land something a bit lucky. But I do think he'll try and box with Parker in the early stages. But as ever, he will take his chances to go into that chaos mode that he loves to activate when he sees the right moment to do so. Parker's job is basically to limit those three things, those three setups, to be defensively sound in general, but then he's got to apply pressure to Wardley, and I showed you in my tactical breakdown, it's all about level changes. It's all about making Wardley throw first. Basically, Parker's got to box a very patient fight, and his windows of opportunity will open up. Very patient, very disciplined, and then his experience and his power should come into play. But he's got to make sure he doesn't sit in the pocket too long. He's got to make sure that he's busy and he's feinting and just basically moving and boxing well. He wants this to be a proper boxing match, and he needs to box him throughout. He cannot get lazy. That's what I'm trying to say. The equation in terms of the timing of this fight is this a Joseph Parker who's at the peak of his powers and super experienced and with the new strength and conditioning program behind him for a couple of years now? Is this a peak Joseph Parker ready to go and become potentially a world champion? Will that be too much for Fabio Wardley, or has Fabio Wardley actually got Joseph Parker at quite a good time? Because I have to be honest with you, one of my biggest concerns about Parker is I do believe his recent run of form, I don't think it's as good as it looks on the surface. I do believe that when he fought Wilder was shot to bits. Now, he may have always beaten Wilder anyway, but that was still not a good version of Deontay Wilder. The Zhile Zhang win was a very good one, but again, Zhang is a limited fighter. He knocked Parker down twice in that fight, but he absolutely couldn't finish him because Zhang just doesn't have the volume and punch output. He's a very slow, plodding heavyweight, very technically good, very powerful, but he doesn't throw a lot of punches. So it's no surprise that fight went the way it did. In fact, it was kind of perfect. He knocked him down a bit, but also he got outboxed in the end and outworked. And finally, the Bakole win. Bakole came in 310 pounds as a last-minute replacement for Daniel Dubois. I still was impressed by what Parker did in there, but I just really don't think you can judge Bakole when he was that out of shape. You know, the names Wilder, Zhang, Bakole, they carry a lot of kudos commercially, but in reality, I don't know if those wins are as good as everyone thinks they are. And with the fact that, yes, everyone's saying, oh, Joseph Parker's only 33, but he's been around a very long time, and you know what they say, your boxing age is not the same as your biological age. It depends how many wars you've had, how many tough training camps you've had. And there's a small voice in my head that goes, maybe, just maybe, this Parker isn't as physically in a good a place as we think he is. It's a little bit like the whole Dubois-AJ thing. AJ came back, he had a couple of good names that he, well, not even good names. He had a couple of wins over names that made him look extremely good. As soon as he got in there with a fresh, hungry young guy in Daniel Dubois, he got absolutely steamrolled. So that's a realistic possibility. It's something we actually have to consider here. Wardley could be getting him in a great moment. Wardley is fresh. Wardley is an absolute beast, and Wardley will try for the whole of the fight. But having said all of that, at the same time, Wardley hasn't been at this level yet. And it doesn't matter what you say. And I know I said earlier that Hooney has some certain attributes that are better than Parker. Overall, Parker is don't get it twisted, Parker is a much better boxer than Hooney. I'm just saying Hooney does a couple of things well, potentially better than Joseph Parker. Wardley won't be stupid. Wardley knows this is the first time he's been at world level. Wardley will know he can't get hit as much as he normally does against a guy like Joseph Parker, because something that not a lot of people have been talking about is the fact that, yes, Wardley is a big puncher and he can hurt Parker, but for sure Parker is the biggest puncher Wardley's been in there with. And frankly, I think the fact Wardley has been able to get through these fights has largely relied on the fact that he's not been in there with very big punches. Fraser Clark is not a very big puncher. Justice Hooney is also not a very big puncher. Yes, all heavyweights can punch to an extent, but as heavyweights go, they're not the biggest punchers out there. And if they had been, it might have been quite a different story for Fabio Wardley, because as I say, everything he does relies on him being in constant danger. He fights right on the line. It's what's so impressive about him. The other interesting factor to consider that some people have mentioned is that Ben Davison's been very quiet around this fight. And look, you could say that's one of two things. One, he's not really quite sure how they're going to beat Joseph Parker. Or two, he's seen something. We don't know, but it could mean that they actually chose him for a reason. We shall see. So in making my prediction, I guess the final leap of faith is you go one of two ways here. If you want to predict that Fabio Wardley's going to win, you're thinking that actually Parker, his form isn't as good as everybody says it is. He's beaten guys that aren't actually that great, or there was caveats to why they couldn't perform in the ring, and that actually Parker is coming towards the end of his career. Physically, he's not what he once was, and that Wardley actually might catch him with something and be able to just outwork and overwhelm him, similar to what happened in that Joe Joyce fight. We should say that Parker has told us that he was sick before that one with a chest infection and shouldn't really have been in there, but we don't know for sure the ins and outs of that. If you're taking the leap of faith in your prediction and you're going for Joseph Parker, then basically what you're saying is that he'll be able to diffuse all the dangerous tools and weapons of Fabio Wardley. He'll be able to defensively be sound and keep himself safe in there, and that he does punch considerably harder than a lot of the other guys Wardley's been in there with, and so he'll be able to hurt him enough that Wardley can't be quite as aggressive as he normally is. So yeah, I'm not ruling out either of those scenarios. I think they're both possible. They're both possible realities. And even if you just chuck all of that out the window, at the end of the day, it's heavyweight boxing. So either one of these guys could randomly finish the other one at any time, because that's just how it works when you're a massive puncher. Someone can always land a lucky shot. But look, it's not a really out there pick, but it's time to make my final prediction. And I am going for Joseph Parker to win this fight. I just feel that there's more known knowns there. I'm happier to, pin my colors to that mast and say I think that Parker's going to get this done. I do think the major factor being that he will punch that bit harder than anyone else that Fabio Wardley's been in there with, combined with his ringcraft and guile. Even if physically he had declined a bit, I still think he's probably got enough about him to get it done. And maybe then some. This genuinely could be the best Joseph Parker. We just don't really know. I need a bit more context to some of these performances. The final question is whether or not I think it's going to be a knockout win or points. I think Fabio Wardley is an incredibly tough fighter. He really is. He sees everything coming as well, because he's always looking to throw those counter shots, those counter moments. And he's always watching what his opponent's doing as a result of that. But he is also quite reckless at times. I could definitely see Parker approaching this one in a way where he's just boxing him. He's looking to make Wardley make mistakes. He's just diffusing what he does and then maybe turning the screw as the fight goes on a little bit. I think what makes me think this is going to be a knockout is Wardley's warrior spirit. The fact that when he starts to get hurt more and more and more, I do think at some point he's going to take chances. And I think that Parker in those moments could stop him. And also the way that, you can draw some of these moments from Wardley, these counter punches. If you can draw them from him, he's there to be hit very, very cleanly. as Fraser Clark was able to do when holding his feet a bit more than someone like Hooney did. When Parker holds his feet, it's a different story to when Fraser Clark holds his feet. So I'm going to go for Parker by knockout. I'm going to go for Parker by knockout in the second half of the fight. You know, the actual predictions knockout, if you're pushing me for rounds, I think rounds 5 to 9. That's where I see the knockout coming. And look, just to caveat everything I've said, at the end of the day, guys, as you can see, this is the best guess. I obviously don't know, but having analyzed everything I have, having assessed the full picture, that's my final prediction. But guys, make sure you get your final prediction in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. I want to know what you think. In the pinned comment, I'm going to put a couple of things for you. There's going to be a Discord server you can join. I've got a Reddit group now as well, where you can go and comment, chat about the boxing, talk about boxing tactics. And of course, we've got the link for the fight in the description if you'd like to purchase it with DAZN. Make sure you check out my tactical breakdown as well if you're still interested. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. And as I always say, on to the next one.